On this episode of From One Player to Another, we have legendary bass player Robbie Crane. You know him from Vince Neil, Rat, Lynch Mob, and currently Black Star Riders, and today he's at Go DPS Music Live Studio. This is Greg Mara, and this is From One Player to Another. All right, this is From One Player to Another. We're here at Go DPS Live Music Studios with Robert Anthony Crane. Did I get the middle name right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Perfect.
man. So, Robbie, thanks for coming out today, man.
Yeah, good times. It's always nice to get out, and especially in today's times, and travel around and see what's going on and come visit everybody at the GoDap studio, which is always awesome here.
Yeah, man. Here we are mid-July.
Yeah.
And we're 6 feet apart. I measured it a couple times. Just don't spit on me, and I think we'll be okay.
I'm a spitter.
So so you came in to pick up some basses today. Talk about your association with Sawtooth.
Yeah, the Sawtooth Rudy Sarzo acoustic fretless, this one in particular, bass. I also use the fretted. I've been using them for about a year now, a little over a year. Took them to Europe, did it on our last tour, the Another State of Grace tour of Black Star Riders. In the cold, in the heat, in the in stores, on stage, they just performed amazingly. Fishman preamp sounded amazing.
Yeah.
Love it. Got a lot of compliments. Really durable, really road tested for me. I just love them. I think they're just so well made, and Rudy and the guys at Sawtooth really did a great job of just designing and building a great bass. And I love it. The next, for me, I'm a truss rod adjustment freak. I'm like,
me too.
Every day.
I'm right there with you on that one.
I didn't touch the next once, and I was surprised. Finland 4 degrees.
Right. So, but an acoustic like a bass that's not like a solid piece of wood, you use that on stage with a ton of power behind you. Did you guys have in-ears? Did you have amps on stage? How'd that work out?
Yeah, I'm an oxymoron. I'm a loud amp guy with in-ears. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I run 3 sounds, so I have a DI that's just a fresh clean. Then I have a little bit of a mid dirty amp, and then I have a dirty amp, and I run them. I interact, but for the most part in Black Star Riders, I run them full time. So I did foam the interior of my fretless.
Yeah.
And man, it's thunder. I mean, it really has, and I use them on the ballads, and they just are really solid guitars, and they sound amazing through my amps. Again, I'm a Fender guy. I'm a P-bass guy. I've been since I was youngster. I played the same bass since I was 15.
Yeah.
And so I've always been kind of picky. I used to use this Martin that I got years ago, and acoustic, and it was close. But these are like right in line with my Fenders. They're just big and growly and punchy. And I'd be honest with you, thought I was going to change their Fishman preamp to something else, and I was like, no, it sounds perfect.
Right.
Anyways, it has such just a true full-bodied sound, and it's just really strong. There's no, some preamps. I mean, I've had some LL or whatever's, and you know what I mean. Whatever the different preamps in there, and I just never was a fan. And I really love the Fishman for me. And I'm not an endorsee. I just like the bass and like how it came stock out of the box.
Absolutely.
I think Robbie here at Sawtooth did a little setup on mine. And
he sets up everything
amazingly,
and they're really great. Like there's nothing you have to do as soon as.
I'm telling you, even my tech was like, acoustic basses. And we shipped them from here. Sawtooth shipped them to England for me, and they came out of the box at rehearsal at John Henry in London. And our techs were like, "Oh God, I'm gonna have to get with these things." And they literally out of the box shipped. I didn't change anything. I just
that's excellent.
They sounded amazing. So yeah.
So tell me about growing up. You grew up in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. I mean, you grew up here where there was a music industry.
Yeah.
Sunset Strip, that whole thing. And, I know you played with Vince Neil in the 90s and stuff. So talk about growing up, your first rigs, your first gigs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so when I was a youngster, I grew up in the West Hollywood area. So I went to Fairfax High School and
Very cool.
Bancroft Junior High School and Laurel Elementary. And in our neighborhood, we lived I lived on Genesee and Willoughby, which is like right in the West Hollywood area. And so we would see Flea, played his trumpet as a kid early. And my sister dated Hillel Slovak, the guitar player from the Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
So they all lived in our neighborhood. And that was kind of what was going on in our scene. There were gangs and there was, a little of everything, a little flavor of everything. But mostly music was like the cool thing, skateboarding, BMXing and music. So it was kind of a natural progression as maybe one would grow up in the Midwest and get into sports. We all got into music. And so we
what year is this? We're talking early 80s?
No, yeah, 83, 82, 83, 84.
Yeah.
And again, when I say that I grew up in Hollywood, I mean, what most people don't understand is like how you used to ride your skateboard to the local rec hall in whatever city you did.
Right.
We'd ride our skateboard to Barney's Beanery or to, to the Rainbow or the, I mean, I was 10 or 11 years old and I would go watch Wasp and, or younger bands in the late 70s. We would see Snow, which was Carlos Cavazos band.
The Cavazos and that one dude's like a MMA.
Yeah. So the progression went from, just being a street kid into music. And so when I was 14, we put a band, our first band together. My best friend Serge Shakarian, Sean Hashem, and my friend Stuart Waldman. So we started our first band together. We were 14 and we'd rehearse at our friend Sean's. And then from that, we progressed into this other band that eventually was my first band to play out. And I was about 15 at the time. And our first gig was at the Troubadour. So what happened was, there's a whole other thing. I was growing up in Hollywood around bands a lot, and I started working for the band Poison when I was a youngster, and about 15, about the same time frame, a little earlier. I was Bob Dahl from Poison's bass tech. And so at our first gig at the Troubadour, the Poison guys all came down, and not only did they come down, they were like, hey, do you want us to introduce you? And Poison was really big at the time in 85, 84, 85 in Hollywood. They were selling at all the clubs. And we're like, yeah, man, can you introduce us? And they literally went up and played Talk Dirty to Me on our equipment and then introduced us, and we came on stage. That was my first gig ever at the Troubadour. It was a Wednesday night. And so that was kind of like my introduction into music. I wanted to be around music at any capacity. So my first bass rig was quite literally a PV-TNT 15.
I totally remember this.
Yeah. And my bass was my black Fender P bass that I have now. So was the gear. I mean, I was pretty poor as a kid. I didn't have any money, and my family was, fairly lower working class. And so I just had to kind of accumulate what I could. And so a lot of my experience as a young kid was revolved around a lot of that scene that was going on.
Right. So you were basically embedded in that scene in the very beginning. So, I mean, it's funny because when you watch like Behind the Music, like VH1 Classic had that program, and they talk about when Poison came out to California, and they built up that party scene.
Yeah.
They built up that sort of stage thing of the glam and the hair and the look of everything being fluorescent.
Yeah.
You were right there checking for Bobby.
Yeah, absolutely. So right after I joined right when CC kind of joined the band, and again from when they were clubs all the way till they got their record deal, and then I went on the first tour with them with Cinderella and Loudness.
Very cool.
And
Loudness, love that.
Yeah,
band.
I was 17, and we were on. I was on a tour bus on tour. Yeah. My parents were like, "Have fun."
Yeah.
And it was cool. It was a really great experience. Yeah.
What's right after that? So you have all of this sort of like stagehand. I don't want to, diminish that, but
I was
you had
a crew
all
guy. Yeah.
You were the tech guy.
Loved it.
But then you went from, so we're talking, this got to be like 87, 88, somewhere in there.
86, 87, yeah. 87.
You went from that to playing in bands.
So I think my first paid gig, I became, quote unquote, my dad's like, you're a professional musician. I think I was 17 or 18. I was paid to play in a band. And from then on, I think about every gig except for one or two, I was paid to be in the band.
Yeah.
They would pay for my rent and they would pay me a salary. So it's just interesting growing up in that time. And my gear progressed as time went on. I got a job working at the China Club in Hollywood when I was about 18 or 19. And that gig allowed me or gave me the ability to be able to purchase better gear. So I ended up with Hartke, Galen Kruger gear and same P bass. And I had a Charvel bass for a little while. But
everybody had a Charvel something back then.
Yeah. I was in a band called New Haven with a guitar player named Tim Kelly. And Tim Kelly.
Slaughter.
Yeah. So Tim and I were both in New Haven together. I met Mark Slaughter.
What year is this?
88, 89.
Yeah.
I was 19, 88.
So this is right before Slaughter basically launches.
This is before Slaughter started.
Yeah.
I was there when they put the band together.
Yeah.
Well, I met Mark and Dana. Dana was one of the A&R guys for Chrysalis at the time. Yeah. And our band showcased for Chrysalis.
That's
and
so
Dana
cool,
was one of the A&R guys.
Yeah.
And he was so awesome. It was intimidating, and we did our showcase. And his words were to the effect of, he said, band's terrible. It was just great. We finished our showcase. Band's terrible. Bass player has a chance. I'm stealing the guitar player.
Yeah.
And the next day, they got Tim into Slaughter.
Very cool, man.
And Tim to me was like a young...
Tim was excellent.
Yeah, like
An
a young
excellent
Steve
guitar
Lukather,
player.
like just
Absolutely.
really cool
Yeah.
and a really great guy. And he had the best gear that I had played with anyone I
Yeah.
ever played with, Bradshaw and everything set up. And he was really talented. So I was around for a lot of the recording of that first record. And so through that, Dana and Mark were kind enough to help me out. They sent me out on auditions. Randy Jackson from Zebra, and again I was like 19.
Yeah.
And they sent me out on the audition for Lynch Mob. Because George Lynch and Mick Brown were putting a band together and they had this singer in mind. So I ended up going to Arizona and with Oni, George, and Mick and playing
before the first Lynch Mob record came out.
Oh yeah, demos like in the early days.
Wow,
and
that's incredible.
And I ended up living there with Oni in an apartment and having some really great times with George. The reality was that I just musically wasn't good enough yet. I never was taught. I just kind of taught myself. Growing up in Hollywood, you just fended for yourself. I didn't have any lessons, no theory background. I didn't have any idea what I was really doing, what I was getting into. And in hanging out with those guys, George used to say to me, and we laugh about it now. It was at his birthday party. He kept hugging me, going, "I love playing with you. I love being around you. Can't you play better? I mean, how can I get you?"
When
to be
was
better?
this? When did George say that?
This is 88 or 89. Yeah, you know what I mean. No, it was a great moment. To be honest with you, because George was one of my guitar heroes. Warren DeMartini, George Lynch, Eddie Van Halen.
We're the same.
Yeah,
We're the
same era.
Yeah.
And so George, just to be around him, much less to be in a room, I was intimidated as all piss. Came into this big, kind of like a warehouse place like this, but like this massive empty room with the stage set up and George's whole guitar rig, and they had Jeff Pilson's bass rig that I played through, and Mick Brown. Wild Mick Brown picked me up at the airport in his purple Corvette.
No
it was
way.
like he's like, "Hey man, Wild Mick Brown, what's that?" And you're like, wow, this 19-year-old kid that had just seen these guys on video and was a massive fan.
Yeah.
It was very intimidating. So I rolled into that gig. I played with them for a while, but I ended up not being good enough to get the gig. But I was there, no joke. And I was totally cool with it. They were auditioning other bass players still, so I just kind of stayed on until they found the guy. And I was there when Anthony Esposito came to the apartment, knocked on the door. I opened the door and I go, "Hey!" and Anthony was the right guy because he was experienced, he was older, and he did such a great job.
So we just talked about the George Lynch, the Lynch Mob days, which for me, that was like when I was graduating high school. I was still living in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
And I listened to that record over and over and over.
Sure.
What's the transition from the Lynch Mob era to whatever's next? Because before we talked today, I think I may have seen you back in Pennsylvania in the mid-'90s playing with Rat or something. And that's the first time I heard Robbie Crane, the name Robbie Crane. I'm going, okay,
me too.
Wait a minute.
The first time I'd heard Robbie Crane too, I was like, what?
So talk about that. Talk about what's between Lynch Mob and Robbie Crane.
So after I left Arizona, which would have been, I guess, the end of 88, I came back to LA, end of 88, beginning of 89. And I came back to LA and with my tail between my legs, to be honest with you. Partially so excited about the experience and partially like, hey, look, man, if you're going to really do this, you got to get your stuff together because, musically, you weren't good enough. Truth. And it gave me a great opportunity to go home and kind of reassess my situation. So I really got diligent. And like I thought my friend Donnie Martinez and I, we lived in this apartment together. And that was actually the call I got. If you ever see those movies where like somebody calls you and you're like, "Hello," and they're like, "Hi, it's Pam Anderson." And you're like, "Yeah, right." You hang up on them.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite literally happened a couple of times in my life at key points. And I think I've said this earlier that a lot of my life and my gigs are like dumb luck.
Yeah.
And so with the Lynch Mob thing, how it started, Donnie Martinez and I live in this apartment like in Van Nuys from this gal Jean that we're living with, and the phone rings, and it's like noon, and we're sleeping, and I picked the phone up, and it's like, hi, is Robert there? And I'm like, this is, and he's like, hi, this is George Lynch, and I'm like, click, I swear, I hung up the phone, and then like 2 minutes later, the phone rings again. Hello, is it Robert there? I'm like, who is this? It's George Lynch, and I'm like, yeah, okay. You're George Lynch.
Yeah.
Like what? So he called me and he goes, well, if you want to come, there's a plane ticket for you at noon at the airport. No, at 4 at the airport. And I was like, come on. So I went to the airport and there was a
just
ticket
like
there.
You're hoping that ticket's there.
Yeah. And like I'm telling you, I got on the plane like with my eyes like, oh my God. And I land and Wild Mick Brown picks me up at the airport in this purple, Corvette fresh off the dock in semi truck driving down to LA, and it's not Love
Yeah.
Video. And I'm like, wow, here I am 100 miles an hour down Scottsdale Road, headed out to, Carefree to his house. So I did that gig. I came back to LA. I reassessed my situation. I really felt blessed and had this opportunity to kind of like, I'm young, I still can figure this out. And so I really got into playing bass. And fast forward, I play in a few bands, in LA, 3 bands. 1992 rolls in, and again, I'm playing in bands, and Vince parts ways with Motley Crue. And when he left Motley Crue, Gary, his brother-in-law, had said to me, yeah, Vince is going to do a solo thing, and he's writing some songs with the guys from Damn Yankees, and it's going to be really cool. This is in February of 92. So in March of 92, I'm living in Van Nuys. I'm like, okay, I was sleeping, and he's like, hey, let me put Vince on the phone. And I just hang up the phone. Calls back, he's like, dude, what'd you hang up for? Vince is on the phone. Vince is like, hey, dude, what's up? First time he's ever really talked to me. He actually says, hey, Robbie, what's up? And I'm like, who's Robbie? Right. I was like, huh? And he goes, hey, man, I'm shooting a video today for my song. Do you want to be in my video?
You're invited, but your friends can't come?
It ends up being you're invited, your friend can't come, right? And I'm like, yeah, totally. He's like, well, dude, come down. We're at Van Nuys Airport. Gary will give him the information. I'm like, what? So I get up and take a shower, throw some clothes on. I don't have much. I'm just kind of a dude. Grab my bass, and I'm like all nervous, and I jump in my white Toyota 81 Toyota SR5 pickup truck, and I roll down to Van Nuys Airport, and Vince is in the, they have a hangar, and Vince has got his, white Testarossa, and he's racing it around. He's racing around the inner, because he was racing the sprint cars.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Indy Lights at the time. And so I pull up, and he pulls up next to me in his white Testarossa, and I'm in my, pickup truck, leaking oil everywhere. And he's like, hey, dude. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. He's like, hey, man, cool. Is that your guitar? I'm like, yeah, my guitar. Yeah, my bass. Yeah. So, we walk in, and we go into this, trailer, and I see the drummer, Vic Fox, and I see...
Oh, wow. From Enough's Enough?
Yeah, correct. And I see Phil Soussan from Ozzy.
Oh, nice.
And Phil's got a bass on, and I'm like...
Interesting.
So I'm like, oh,
what's happening?
Like they already must have got a bass player. I guess I'm not going to be in the video. I'm like, well, maybe I'll be in the crowd. I'm like, oh yeah. And he goes, man. And Vince goes, hey, dude, is that your guitar? And I go, well, it's my bass. And he goes, oh, I thought you played guitar. And I go, well, yeah, I can play guitar because I can play. I started on guitar as a kid, like every kid, classical guitar or whatever. And then, I learned my Van Halen and, Sabbath songs, but I was always a bass player. All of my friends played guitar, and my dad, I didn't tell you this, my dad was a bass player. So he had a bass. So I was like, well, I got access.
And you wanted to play bass.
Well, initially.
That was your intention. You enjoyed playing bass?
Initially, it was out of just necessity because there were no bass players in our neighborhood.
Yeah,
so I was like, I'll play bass. There was Louis Metz, Flea, and me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those were the only bass players at the time. So I picked up a bass and I started playing bass, and that's kind of how I ended up playing bass. And then I loved it. I was like, yeah, man, Michael Anthony, Gene Simmons, you know what I mean? I was into it, Geezer, I was totally into Geezer and all those guys when I was a kid. Here I am. Vince says, was that your guitar? And I say, no, it's my bass. And he's like, do you play guitar? And I go, yeah. And I go, but I only brought a bass. And he goes, oh, you don't have a guitar? Don't worry about it, dude. Gibson sent me a bunch. And there were literally like those Ultra stand, the 12 or 10 ones, like 4 of them full of Les Pauls. He goes, pick one. So I was like, wow. So and his wife, Sharice, was so good to me and still is a great friend of mine, and Gary. They were like, hey, this red Les Paul looks cool. So I was like, okay, I'm going to play guitar in this video. So I literally had never heard the song, and they're playing the song in the room, and everyone's learning it. And I kind of get the guitar, and I kind of learn it really quick. And it wasn't terribly difficult for me to learn. So I'm like, oh, I could play this. Wow. So the band that ended up in the touring band later for Vince was Phil, myself, Vic Fox.
On guitar?
I played rhythm guitar. So if you watch the You're Invited But Your Friend Can't Come video.
I can't wait to see that, man.
My first introduction into music after going home with my tail between my legs. I learned how to play the bass right.
As a guitar gig.
I don't even get it as a guitar player. I get my first opportunity as a guitar player.
That's very cool.
So I do the video.
You're the utility guy. You're the ultimate utility guy.
I aim to please.
Tech.
I aim to please.
Bass player.
I aim to please.
Guitar player.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more to come.
Well, all of my guitar player friends hated me because, listen, I do the MTV, the video. The video's #1 on MTV for like months.
I remember it was all over.
Yeah. And then we do the MTV Movie Awards.
Yeah.
And I play guitar on the MTV Movie Awards.
So Vince Neil at some point had Steve Stevens, if I remember correctly?
So what happens is we do the video. And then we do the video for it in March, and then March and April and May we look for a lead guitar player. And the truth is that with Vince, he I thought I just did the video, so there was no official "you're in the band."
Right.
And so we were at his pool, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I got the MTV Movie Awards," and we're all kind of sitting out, and the video is massive, and everything's rad. And I keep parking my white pickup truck in front of his mansion, and he's like, "Dude, stop parking that piece of crap in front of my house. It's like embarrassing to me, right?" Because Steve Vai lived across the street. He's like, "I don't want anyone to think that's my car." And he had, his cars were stupid. Right. He had lifts with Ferraris, just tons of Ferraris. It was awesome. And so he he says, "Hey man, we're looking for a guitar player for the MTV Movie Awards." And I said, "Hey, if it's not live, if it's live to tape," I go, "Maybe, I could do it if you want me to, and if I could just fake it." And he goes, "Do it. What are you talking about? You're in the band." He's like, "You're in the band, man." He's like, "We got to find a lead guy. You're the other guy." I was like, "Really?" He took me in. I'm not kidding. I tell people this story all the time. He took me into he's like, "Come on." We went from the pool into his office. And he had this office with these hand carved, which is, nowadays it's kind of weird, but ivory chairs that were elephants. And he's like, "Grab an elephant." And, you weren't allowed to sit in the elephants. You know what I mean? Because they were probably 10 grand each. You know what I mean? And he's like, "Dude, grab an elephant." And I was like, wow, I sit in the elephant chair. And he writes me this check and he hands me this check. And I'm like, he hands me this check for $5,000. He goes, "Get your shit together. We're going to get a lot of work to do to build this band." I was like, "Cool."
This is the Rudy Sarzo Sawtooth acoustic electric jazz. Let me see, acoustic electric bass. But this is fretted, not jazz. It's a very wide, beautiful neck, all maple. It's beautiful. We love it. Fishman preamp. Chad plays the cajon. Which cajon are you playing there?
I'm playing the Spirit.
He's playing the Spirit cajon today, which is always nice.
So $5,000 check from Vince Neil you were talking about.
Yeah, Vince really took really great care of me, and Vince was Vince was like the first person that I ever met in the music industry. Listen, everyone was wonderful to me, and there's no dig on anybody. But Vince really, when they say somebody will take the shirt off their back for you. Vince absolutely did that for every one of us in the band. Ended up that check I took that day to the bank. Never had a bank account. My dad helped me open a bank account in Woodland Hills. And it was like the Steve Martin movie in The Jerk when he's, I give the guy the check. I'm like, he's like, "Okay, sign the back." I'm like, "Yeah, I want to put $2,500 in a checking account. I want to put the rest in the savings." He's like, okay, no problem at all. So he's like, "It's $2,500 in this. And you sign this, okay? I'm going to put $47,500 in the other." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "I'm going to put $47,500 in your savings." And I was like, "Huh?" And I look at the check and it's for $50,000.
No way.
And I call Vince and I'm like, "Oh my God, I think you made a mistake."
You made a mistake. There's one
like,
too many zeros.
I think you meant to write it for $5 and it's for $50. He goes, $5 grand? What are you gonna do with $5 grand? He goes, "Dude, I told you we got to get our lives together. We got to get this going, man. We got to focus on this." I was like, wow. So, I went from 0 to 100 at 22 years old. Very, very quickly, and Vince was very good to me, and I'm very appreciative of Vince, and I've always appreciated that time because the addition of Steve Stevens a few months later to do the MTV Movie Awards, that was Steve's for the week prior to that, which was May of 92. The addition of Steve Stevens, elevated that so amazingly. So I was the second guitar player. We do the MTV Movie Awards. We do the first record. I'm a rhythm guitar player.
And by the way, for folks that don't know, MTV was a channel that used to have music.
Yeah.
Music television.
Yes.
And it was very cool.
It was like the 24-hour news channels nowadays, but it was all music. And so we go into the studio to do the record. I'm not stupid enough to think that I'm going to be on this record because I'm a guitar player and Steve Stevens in the band. So Steve and Phil and Vic record the record. For whatever reason or another, they deemed the bass playing on the record not to be what they wanted. So Steve went back and re-recorded all the bass, and we looked for a bass player. And so I ended up we looked at all these bass players. Steve says, sees me play bass a couple of times, and he goes, "You're going to be the bass player." So I ended up playing on 2 of the bonus tracks on that record. At the end, after the record was done, we came back and did 2 bonus tracks that later made the Japanese records. And so I'm on 2 of those songs. Cool. So I got a
yeah, man, absolutely.
The Exposed record. But that's Steve Stevens' amazing bass playing on that record. And then I did the next record, which was the Carved in Stone, and then we did a live record in Japan, which never came out other than in Japan.
Yeah.
And it was live at Budokan. I got to play Budokan a couple times with Steve and Vince and all those guys.
Yeah. And I wish we had more time because we would absolutely talk about all the touring stuff that you've done as well.
So Van Halen, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We do the Vince thing. I end up leaving Vince in 96. Larry Moran, our tour manager at the time, he was Vince's tour manager. He had went on to do this other artist, this Asian artist, after I left Vince's band. About a month later, he asked me to do this artist with him. And I do it. It's Al Pitrelli, this Asian artist, drummer, and Stephen Piercy from Rat singing.
I love Al Pitrelli,
So,
by the way.
Al Pitrelli's unbelievable guitar
Alice
player.
Cooper for a little bit, had
Trans-Siberian. Guy's just amazing.
Amazing.
He's like El Di Meola meets Zach Wilde
incredible.
meets he's amazing. Yeah. He's got unbelievable talent. But I end up doing that, meeting Stephen Piercy. And this is in 96, literally out of a gig for a month, do that, out of a gig for a month again, Stephen Piercy calls me for Rat. I joined Rat, in 96. And I did the Collage record was the first thing I did, like that first week I joined the band. And then we went out and toured like crazy. We did a 99 record with Collage on Columbia. And then I was in that band for almost 16 years, up until 2012. My final record being the Infestation record in 2010 with Carlos Cavazo, Bobby Blotzer.
Wait, you were on that record?
Sure.
I love that record.
Oh, thank you.
Incredible,
yeah. I have a song on that record, which is pretty cool too.
Which song is it?
Lost Weekend.
Yeah.
My riff sounded a little bit too much like a few other Rat songs for those guys, but the producer and the label, overruled them. Hey, man, it's Rat. I'm a Rat fan, so if I play guitar, I play Rat songs.
You talked about being, having Warren DeMartini be one of your sort of like the guitar players you loved back in the day. You got to play with him. Yeah,
Warren. I got to play with Warren. I got to play with George Lynch. I got to play with Michael Schenker. I got to play with Carlos Cavazo. I got to play with Steve Stevens. Scott Gorham from Thin Lizzy, who I'm in Black Star Riders.
Let's talk about Black Star Riders.
Yeah.
Now obviously we're coming to present day, and that band. When I started researching, obviously, so that band was basically Thin Lizzy.
Kind of. The initial incarnation, absolutely, with the exception of Jimmy DeGrasso. Right, so I guess they formed in 2012 out of Thin Lizzy. I think Thin Lizzy had run its course to a point for them, and they wanted to make a record, and they wanted to respect the lineage and the history of Thin Lizzy. And as opposed to doing it as Thin Lizzy, they decided to start a new entity. And in that, Damon Johnson, Marco Mendoza, the great Marco Mendoza on bass, Scott Gorham, Ricky Warwick, and they recruited Jimmy DeGrasso.
Yeah.
And they did the first record, All Hell Breaks Loose, 2012. And so they did that record. They released it at the end of 12, beginning of 13. They did some touring on it. And Marco, I don't think, was ever fully committed to it. I think he said he'd do the record and the tour. Yeah. And then he had, Neil Sean going.
He's got a ton of stuff
Marco's
going on.
Such a wonderful man and such a great player. He actually was Dead Daisies. He started Dead Daisies. Right. And that's what his focus was going to be. And so they looked for a bass player. And I think they looked for a bass player for a little while. And Jimmy DeGrasso and I had crossed paths through one of my best friends, Kerry Kelly. I had subbed a gig for Rudy Sarzo. And we were in Russia. So we ended up doing this Russian tour together, Jimmy DeGrasso and I. And we met, we played together. A year later, he calls me and says, 2014, and says, we're looking for a bass player. Do you want to come and check it out? And at the time, I was playing with a pop artist named Daniel Powder. Had a bad day.
Right.
Turned it around. And so I was doing this great pop gig there.
So there was one Black Star Riders record out, and then you joined the band.
Correct. Yeah. Prior to me joining, so I auditioned for Black Star Riders at the Canyon Club in Agoura Hills. Yep. And Marco was there, and they were out with Skid Row, and I literally played the 3 or 4 songs, and they went last down note of the last song, and they put their instruments, and they all walked off stage left and didn't say anything to me. I was just kind of standing there like, all right, I guess I didn't get that gig. And Marco was right next to me. He's laughing. He's like, oh, it was great. It was great. All right, whatever, And, 2 days later, they text me and they go, okay, you're the guy. And I was like, really? Like, it didn't seem that way. So I get the gig. I get to go on tour with them for a week on the Skid Row tour to kind of get to know the guys because I didn't know any of them really well. And just a wonderful experience to meet Scott Gorham and Damon Johnson and Ricky, who's one of my best friends. And Jimmy DeGrasso was amazing. And through the progression of the band, as with many bands
of
today,
yes.
you play with certain guys, and people have other aspirations and they move on. So Jimmy moved on, and we got the great Chad Saliga from Breaking Benjamin.
Right, I interviewed him a few days ago. What a cool guy.
Yeah, what a great guy. Yeah. Chad is from a different era, as we talked about earlier, and so there's a little bit of a gap there for us. But musically, music knows no boundaries, and we just connected. We did the All Hell Breaks Loose record last year with with Jay Rustin.
Right.
I'm on we're going on my fourth, Black Star Riders' fifth. We did 2 records with Nick Raskulinecz of Foo Fighters, Rush,
everybody now,
Alice in Chains fame.
The Sound City movie,
Yeah, Nick's great. We did Killer Instinct was the first one we did with him in Nashville, and the second one we did was Heavy Fire with him, and just a great experience to work with Nick. Yeah. He was an amazing producer, and then we ended up getting Jay Rustin for our last record we did here in Los Angeles. Damon Johnson moved on to do his solo career.
Kristen Martucci, right?
Yeah, we ended up scoring. People say, "Oh, how'd you get?" I'm like, we ended up scoring.
He's awesome. I really like his style.
Great style.
He's a great singer too. I saw him at Lucky Strike a couple of years back, and he was doing this punk thing.
Yeah,
and it was way rad.
He's true punk to the bone. I mean, and him and Ricky together are very much into punk rock, and I grew up kind of in that scene a little bit too in Hollywood, being a youngster and hanging around the whole lads gang crew and the Okie Dog scene and all that, and so we have a lot in common, the three of us, and so it's been a great experience. Scott has been just unbelievable. The last record we did it with Jay Rustin here in Los Angeles, and it was #1 in the UK, and it did really well for us. And so
congratulations!
Thank you. And so COVID hit and ended our tour cycle.
Just parked it.
As with everybody. So what do you do when you get lemons? You make lemonade. So we're going to do our 5th record. We're going to start that in October. I just did another Lynch Mob record. I ended up coming back to Lynch Mob a few different times. 2010. For a while, I did 3 records with them then, and then I just rejoined with them with George and Oni and Brian Tichy.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
So when is that record coming out?
So we have. I just talked to George when I was on my way over here. Mid-August, I think it's coming out. And what it is
that a Rat Pack Records?
Yeah,
release?
Yeah. I think that's George's thing. Yeah. And which is fine. It's what it is the 30th anniversary of Wicked Sensation.
Excellent.
And so Brian and George only had this idea to re-record the songs, but in a vein of what this band would play it like.
Very cool, man.
So some of the main songs are really different, and they're great. I mean, some of them have a life of their own now. For a Million Years, I think is one of the cooler. It reminds me of an early Rush song, and the vibe's really cool.
So cool. So is the album tracked?
Oh yeah, we tracked it. It's
done.
Right when COVID hit. Right when the first week when they said you had to stay home in March, we recorded that record. Very cool. And then I have a Ricky Warwick record coming out, solo record with Keith from Buck Cherry. Mm-hmm. He produced it. Keith's amazing.
The original guitar player, right?
Keith Nelson,
the founder of Buck Cherry.
Songwriter. Him and Josh and all that. And Keith Nelson produced it and recorded it, played the guitars. And
you've stayed busy, man.
Yeah, man, it's been really
great.
Cool. Yeah, we got Xavier Muriel, their drummer from Buck Cherry, on it, and myself and Ricky Warwick. So we did that. Our manager Adam Parsons plays a song on that, and then I had this Lynch Mob record coming out, and I'm doing another Black Star Rider record, and then I've been doing dates with the band Warrant. Remember Warrant? My best friend Jerry. I've been subbing for Jerry for a little while. Jerry's taking some time off here and there, so I've been doing a lot of that, and it's been good. It's been good.
So where can folks find you online?
You can
look up everything.
Robbie Crane is not
Robert Anthony Crane
is not a internet savvy individual. I probably should be, but it's just the skateboarder in me. You know what I mean? I've never really been that guy.
Yeah.
You can find me on my Facebook page. It's probably the best place to find me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm around, and I'm just doing my thing, enjoying playing and enjoying living my life, which is great.
Thanks so much for being on the show, Robbie.
Man, what a blast.
It was a lot of fun. I'm sure we could have done a couple more hours. So
I'm a yapper.
Thanks for that, man.
Absolutely.
Mega thanks to Robert Crane for being a guest on this week's episode of From One Player to Another. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to all of our socials on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and everywhere else on the web. This is Greg Marr with Go DPS Music Live. Thanks for watching. See you on the next episode.